There is a sentence tucked into the Gospel of Matthew so easy to read past that most people do. It comes at the end of one of the most well-known miracles in the New Testament, the feeding of the 5,000. After describing the baskets of leftover bread, after describing the astonishment of the crowd, Matthew adds a single quiet qualifier. Besides women and children. 5,000 men. Besides women and children. It is not presented as an apology. There is no explanation offered, no editorial pause, no apparent awareness that this detail might one day become the most philosophically loaded footnote in the entire account. It was simply how things were recorded. Men were the number. Everyone else was the besides. And yet that word, besides, contains an entire world. It contains hundreds of women who had walked hours under a Palestinian sun to hear a teacher speak. It contains children who had fallen asleep on the grass and been carried by their mothers. It contains people who were present, who witnessed the same miracle, who ate the same bread. The question of why this happened is not a simple one. It doesn't have a single answer, and it would be dishonest to pretend it does. It involves ancient census traditions, military logistics, patriarchal social structures, and something stranger and more layered, the way that the same texts that officially omit women and children also preserve their stories with startling intimacy, detail, and dignity. The Bible is, in this particular way, in constant tension with itself. That tension is what makes it worth exploring. To understand what it meant to be counted in the ancient world, you have to understand what counting was for. In the ancient Near East, the census was not primarily a tool of demographic curiosity. It was not conducted to understand population trends or plan for civic infrastructure the way modern governments census their populations. In most ancient contexts, counting people served very specific and very practical functions: taxation and war. The Book of Numbers, which gets its English name precisely from its opening census accounts, records a count commanded by God after the Israelites leave Egypt. The instructions are explicit. Count every man, it says, 20 years old and upward, all who are able to go to war in Israel. Every male by their armies. The phrase, able to go to war, is the key to everything. This was not a census of the whole community. It was a military roster. A head count of available fighting men. The purpose was immediate, functional, strategic. Who can we field? Who forms our army? Who is able-bodied and of fighting age and male? Women and children fell outside that category not because they were considered spiritually lesser but because in the logic of an ancient military census, they simply were not what was being counted. A general doesn't count his camp followers when he needs to know how many swords he can put on the field. The framing was brutally practical. They weren't invisible because no one valued them. They were uncounted because the count wasn't for them. But here is the contradiction that sits beneath that explanation, the one that history doesn't fully resolve. The logic of the count did not stay inside the count. Over generations, administrative invisibility has a way of becoming something more than administrative. When you are never the one being numbered, when your name never appears on the official roster, something happens to how you are seen. Not just by others but sometimes by yourself. The census was military, but the absence from it rippled outward. There is something worth understanding about the specific world these texts emerged from. The ancient Israelites were not operating in a cultural vacuum. They were a people surrounded by and occasionally absorbed into the great empires of the ancient Near East, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, later Rome, all of which operated under similar hierarchical assumptions about gender, status, and what it meant to matter politically. In the ancient world, women's legal standing was almost universally tied to the men in their lives. A daughter belonged to her father's household. A wife was subsumed into her husband's. A widow, perhaps the most precarious figure in the ancient social landscape, was a woman without a man to anchor her legal existence, which is why the Bible returns to the widow again and again, as a concrete test case for the quality of a community's compassion. Property moved through male lineage. Names were recorded patrilineally. The son of was among the most important phrases in any ancient document. Women appear in genealogies with comparative rarity, and when they do, it is often because something significant has happened. A notable birth, an inheritance dispute, a moment where their story forced itself into the official record. The texts were written by human beings who lived inside these structures, breathed their assumptions, carried their frameworks into the act of writing. To expect the ancient census traditions to look like modern egalitarianism would be to misunderstand how sacred texts emerge from human communities. They always come from somewhere. They always carry the marks of when and where they were written. What is perhaps more remarkable is how often the biblical narrative strains against those marks anyway. Because here is the thing that gets lost when we focus only on the census numbers. The Bible's actual story is populated with women whose lives are told with far more depth and psychological texture than any census would suggest. Deborah, a judge and prophet in ancient Israel at a time when military leadership was considered a definitively male domain. She sits beneath a palm tree in the hill country of Ephraim, and people come to her for judgment. When the general Barak is summoned to lead an army against the Canaanite commander Sisera, he refuses to go unless Deborah goes with him. Her response is matter-of-fact and slightly withering. "I'll go," she says, "but the honor of the victory won't belong to you. It will go to a woman." The text doesn't treat this as remarkable. It just tells it. There is no extended theological justification for why a woman is leading Israel. The narrative offers Deborah simply as the leader because she was Ruth, a Moabite widow, twice outside the circle of those who would be officially counted, both as a woman and as a foreigner, whose loyalty to her mother-in-law Naomi is rendered in one of the most famous speeches in all of Scripture. "Where you go, I will go. Where you die, I will die." The book that bears her name is a sustained meditation on loyalty, survival, and belonging across the boundaries that separate insiders from outsiders. It is one of the few books in the Bible named after a woman. Esther, a Jewish woman in the Persian court who risks her life to save her people by approaching the king uninvited, something that could legally result in her death. Her courage is not presented as unusual for a woman. It is presented as extraordinary for a human being. Mary Magdalene, present at the crucifixion when most of the disciples had fled, named in each of the four Gospels as the first witness to the resurrection. The theological weight of that last detail is enormous. In a culture where a woman's testimony carried less legal standing than a man's, the risen Christ chooses a woman as the first witness, the first to carry the news. Some traditions have tried to diminish it. The text doesn't. None of these women were counted in any census. None of them would have appeared on the official military rosters. And yet their stories are preserved in a way that suggests something the census did not capture, that the history of a people includes everyone who lived it. There is a phrase in social science that has no direct ancient equivalent but describes something real: the difference between being counted and being seen. To be counted is to be recorded in the administrative apparatus of a society. To be seen is something older and stranger, to be recognized as fully present, fully human, fully part of the story. These two things can exist independently of each other, and in the world of the Bible, they often do. You would not find a woman's name on the census taken in numbers. And yet you would find her feeding a prophet during a drought. You would find her hiding spies in her city while her government hunted them. You would find her grinding grain before dawn and making decisions about her children and negotiating with creditors and grieving her dead with a specific, documented grief that the text thought worth preserving. Invisibility in the official record did not mean invisibility in the human record. Being narratively preserved is not the same as having power. Being seen in a story is not the same as being heard in a courtroom, or receiving an inheritance, or having your testimony carry weight. The women of the Bible lived real lives under real constraints. The stories don't romanticize those constraints. When Hagar is cast out into the desert by Abraham and Sarah, the text records her terror and her desperation with unsentimental clarity. When the daughters of Zelophehad approach Moses to argue for their right to inherit their father's land, the stakes are understood to be material and urgent, not symbolic. 5 sisters, no brothers. Their father has died, and under the prevailing inheritance laws, his land would pass to male relatives who were not his descendants at all. The daughters, Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah, do something remarkable. They bring their case to Moses, to Eleazar the priest, to the entire assembled leadership of Israel, at the door of the tent of meeting. Their argument is simple: our father died and had no sons. Why should his name disappear from his clan because he had no son? Give us a possession among our father's brothers. And Moses brings their case before God. And the response is, the daughters of Zelophehad are right. You shall give them a possession of inheritance among their father's brothers, and you shall transfer their father's inheritance to them. 5 women, named individually, who were not in any census, who had no official standing before the highest authorities in the land and winning a legal precedent. The very next verse says that what God told Moses became a statute of judgment for the Israelites, to be observed throughout their generations. These women changed the law, and the text remembers their names. Children occupy a different but related position in the biblical narrative. They appear in the census only as a future resource, the next generation of fighting men, perhaps. They appear in inheritance records as heirs to their father's names and property. But in terms of being counted as present, as mattering now, in the life of the community as it currently exists, children in the ancient world occupied a precarious space. Childhood as a distinct, protected phase of life is in many ways a relatively modern concept. In the ancient world, a child's primary social and economic identity was as a future adult. They were apprenticed young, betrothed young, put to work young. Their deaths were mourned, but their lives were often treated as a kind of unfinished state, a becoming rather than a being. Against this backdrop, certain moments in the Gospels carry particular cultural weight. When the disciples try to prevent children from approaching Jesus, a perfectly understandable reaction given the social norms of the time, Jesus' response unsettles the entire framework. "Let the children come to me," he says. "Do not hinder them. For the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." Maybe that gap, between who gets counted and who is actually present, is one of the most persistent and human gaps in the entire biblical story. And maybe the recurring insistence, across both testaments, that the official count is not the last word, is among the things that kept these stories alive long after the administrative systems that shaped them have dissolved into history. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and share for more videos like this.